Hello.
Good morning, good afternoon, maybe good evening for some folks.
Good
Yeah, say
everyone.
hello as you come in. We'd love to hear from you, where you're calling in from. We'll get started in a couple minutes, but just want to give a few minutes for people to kind of come into the room and get settled. Oh, Buenos
Wow.
Aires. Yes, love that. It's going to be the most exciting answer potentially. Definitely more exciting than San Anselmo.
Vienna, very good
Mm.
too.
Wow. Oh, amazing. Okay,
Nice.
so yeah, good evening to a lot of people.
Wow.
Wow. Amazing. Go Birds. I feel like a little bit of a poser when I say that, but
It's the nation slogan right now. We can
totally.
all say go birds.
Completely. Alex, where are you?
I'm in New York City.
Love it. How is it out there today?
I walked outside and it's actually the nicest weather in probably like 2 months, which is still maybe 45 degrees. Sunny, not super windy, not icy anymore.
Nice.
Spring is coming.
I'll take it. I'm in California, so it's sunny and beautiful.
There you go.
All right. I want to go ahead and get started. I think people still come in as we kick things off, but I really want to make sure we maximize the time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. You are in for a real treat. For those of you who don't know us, we are CreatorIQ. We're lucky enough to work with over 1,400 of the best brands and agencies in the world. Alex, who I will introduce officially here in a second, is here today. I think that's what I'm the most excited about. We're going to be talking about a new report that we put together. It's built from, about 10 years of proprietary data that we have been building over the last decade. We'll talk a little bit more too about kind of what that data is, where it comes from, but really digging into what you can learn from the insights we are pulling out of kind of creator information, creator intelligence. If you think about social listening, we have the opportunity to really understand what is kind of shaping creator content and conversations today. And Alex's team kind of puts that into context in a way that is really powerful for brands and agencies who are running programs on the ground. So officially, I'm Brit Starr. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at CreatorIQ. I've been in the industry for over a decade now and lucky enough to be with the company for almost 8 years. Really excited. I love being in this space. I love working with all of you. I think the intersection of kind of technology and consumer and the media landscape is fascinating. And it's really fun being kind of in the driver's seat of some of that change. But today is not about me. It's about Alex. Alex has also been with the company for how long now, Alex?
I think I joined about, if we're going back to Tribe Dynamics days, about a month after you, Britt. So June 2016 from
All
Tribe
right.
to CIQ and keeping on trucking.
All right, heading towards a decade for both of us. Alex heads up our research and insights team. He and his team, again, really look at our proprietary data and figure out ways to package that so that we can advise our brand, our brands, our community, our customers, what's going on, what brands are winning, what can you learn from that, how can you take some of those insights and apply them to your own programs, the way you think about your brand, your program, your business today. Really excited to have him talk about the most recent report that the team has launched, which, Alex, if you can get into that, would love to hear a little bit more about the report.
Yeah, for sure. Great to be here with everyone today. Thank you, Britt, for that wonderful introduction. I'm here for Brands of the Year, as are we all. So, what is Brands of the Year? Essentially, like Britt said, we're taking a lot of our proprietary data and measuring the brands that are performing strongest across major social media platforms in 2024. So, what's really exciting about Brands of the Year is that it's our first ever definitive ranking of social media's top brands. And across 10 different metrics categories that, like you said, we spent over a decade developing and refining, we've examined the brands with the largest social media presence, as well as the brands that are growing that presence most quickly, and putting them head to head to really capture where social media is right now and which brands are foremost on creators' minds.
Yep. And I do want to say too, we want to keep this really interactive. So please send your questions. We'll do our best to answer them throughout. We'll also carve out a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. You can use the chat box. There's a Q&A section as well. But please, yeah, bring your questions forward. There's also, if you notice in the kind of chat box on the side of your screen, there's a tab called Files that has a link to the report as well, so that you can download that and have that information and analysis kind of in your inbox. Moving into kind of why this matters, Alex talked about our creator panel, where we get this data from. What we're tracking is a little over 1 million of the most influential voices in the world. We cover 16 market panels across 18 sectors or industries and over 16,000 brands. And really what we're doing is we're picking up kind of every post that mentions those brands across those markets, across those industries, to really understand how the conversation is evolving over time. What industries are gaining momentum? Where are the conversations, reaching new scale, new heights from, again, these influential voices around the world? So think of it as kind of social listening, but with a hyper focus on influence, right? Who are the creators out there that are driving this conversation, not just broad social listening? Another way to look at this, and I think this is helpful as you think about your own programs, I would imagine that everyone in here is aware of their active community, like the creators that you're actively managing in campaigns. The other layers, if you are not paying attention to your community across multiple levels, I think it's really important to start to understand the importance of those communities and understanding the dynamics of those conversations. We're going to be talking about kind of the highest level, right? That creator universe, the insights that we gleaned for this report. But if you step down in that, if you think about your creator community, the creators that are mentioning your brand all the time, understanding what that conversation is and being able to participate in it, right? Understand what's being talked about, get that feedback, those insights, and really lean into the creators driving the most value for your brand organically is a great way to accelerate the pace of your programs. And then your brand community and your squad is who you should be nurturing. We'll kind of kick it off talking about some of the metrics in the report. Creator retention is a big one that Alex will talk about. And within your brand community, that's really what you're trying to drive. You're trying to retain and nurture a community over time so you can really grow the lifetime value of your community as a whole and each of the relationships within it. So just some context so you know kind of how we think about community, and also how you can kind of take a broader approach to how you think about community, not only in how you activate creators, but in how you can gather insights to fuel your brand and product development, your marketing strategies, and well beyond the confines of your influencer campaigns. So getting into the good stuff, I think why this information matters, and for those of you who read our State of Creator Marketing report, you saw this, but creators are really outpacing and outperforming brands. There's just significantly more content out there created by creators than there are the brands themselves. And this means that creators have a huge hand in shaping perception and community and connection around your brands today. So understanding what that kind of the makeup of those conversations and communities are is really critical to your success. Again, not just as an influencer program, but as a brand today. Okay, Alex, going back to the report, what can we learn from brands of the year, and how can we really understand some of the metrics and data?
Thanks, Brit. That was really helpful context. And I think for the purposes of our report and the discussion today, I do want to clarify that we'll be looking at that entire creator universe when we're talking about brand performance here. So we do drill down in the report and in the discussion here into individual examples of core community members and the activity that they have for brands. But ultimately, we're talking about everybody in the space. And when we talk about everybody in the space, we want to anchor that in something. When we anchor that in something, we go to our key metrics. So let's understand first and foremost there what we're going to be looking at. So I think there's two main buckets that we want to put these top 100 brands in when we talk about their performance when we analyze the broader trends about why these brands are succeeding. So first, we're going to think about the top 100 brands by total EMV. That's earned media value, which is our proprietary metric for showing the general performance of these brands on social. It's a reflection of engagement. It's a reflection of essentially conversation and zeitgeist around a brand, and also a metric of brand desirability within the social media ecosystem. So the top 100 brands by total EMV, like you would imagine, are big established global brands like Spotify and Nike, household brands of that stature. The top 100 brands by year over year EMV growth, however, are often smaller scale, up and coming brands. So these are the ones that you might not have heard of yet, but you'll be hearing about them a lot more soon and are building towards potentially that same kind of global household status. So when we look at these metrics, it's helpful to compare where are brands at the top and where are brands that are rising to the top and see any differences that emerge.
Love that. So also, as you unpack those, there are other metrics, right, that are drivers of total EMV and growth, correct?
That's right. And so we're going to go into some of those metrics now. And one of the biggest ones, one of the most important metrics we have is creator retention. Retention, if some of you know Connor Bagley, who's been associated with Tribe and CIQ for a long time, he's fond of saying retention builds empires. And it's really true. This is the metric that we go to when we look to community health as well as growth at large. And what it's essentially measuring is how many creators are continuing to post about you over time. So if you take a given time period, we're looking at 2024 for the purposes of this report, how many of those creators were also talking about you in 2023? And did they increase their activity in 2024? So more posts, more mentions, more EMV. Were they deepening their connection to your brand over time? And so we look at retention. That's basically a measure of EMV generated by those consistent creators over those time periods compared to EMV generated by new creators who are coming in. So generally, you want to see a high bar here. And we do. We see that those top 100 in total EMV have a 62% retention rate, which is pretty healthy. Now, a 51% retention rate doesn't necessarily mean that these year over year EMV growth standouts are doing poorly. What that actually indicates is that they're adding to their community. Because they're smaller scale, because a lot of them are newer brands, you're seeing that they're still at that point where, while retention is important, they're also trying to just grow and find a new audience and find new voices. So what this shows for brands is that for as much as we say retention is important, and it clearly is, it depends on your stage in the life cycle of your brand. So it's important to have different goals and different benchmarks for retention, depending on, again, the kind of history and general position of your brand.
I love this. I think for me, this is really comparable to the way we run our business. Customer retention is a number one priority for us all the time. And it works the same with your creator community. If you are constantly trying to fill a leaky bucket, right, getting new people to talk about you all the time as the creators that have worked with you, talked about you in the past are kind of falling out the bottom, you're going to be running a really inefficient program. It's going to be really difficult for you to grow. And so maintaining that solid base and really building into creator and community retention is probably going to be one of the most important things you can do. Again, if you think of your program in a similar way that you would think about your business, retention reigns, right? That's why it builds empires. If you do well at retention, growth becomes much easier to access.
Absolutely. But there are other measures by which we can see that growth as well. And one of the ones where we saw a big discrepancy between the top 100 brands in total EMV and the top 100 brands in terms of year over year EMV growth was creator count growth. So again, thinking back to that slide that showed the various circles with different levels of creators, this is now talking about the entire creator universe. So everybody posting about your brand in a given time frame. So when we look to those top brands, the Spotifys and the Nikes of the world, we see a 23% year over year creator count growth, which again is healthy. That shows that generally more people are talking about these brands. But because they're so big, it's kind of capped out in terms of how many people there are to even access. Most people know about Spotify and Nike. It's only a matter of if you're posting about them or not. In comparison, 118%, that's just the average for the top 100 brands in year-over-year EMV growth in terms of how much they are growing their community. So that means that, we're seeing 200, 300, 400% growth, if not more dramatic, in some of the most outstanding cases. So essentially, like retention, this is basically the flip side of that, showing that it makes sense for the brands that are still up and coming to be focused more on growth and more on expansion than necessarily retaining all of the creators they have. And like I said, I'm calling from New York, so we got the sirens going for everybody. We got big fans of creator account growth outside. But essentially, again, this is just another framework by which we can see those different life cycles for brands.
Yep. And I think it's really helpful too. You can look at these as benchmarks, right? Based on where you are in your program, you can look to these as comparables, right? Where are you compared to other brands that are at your same kind of scale and maturity stage? I love this one, like the how disparate these numbers are. 23% for a community like Nike is still significant growth, right? That's thousands of creators. But again, if you're up and coming, if I'm an up and coming brand who's really trying to drive growth within my community, I really need to be focused on new engagements, new interactions, new eyeballs. Again, like put it back into kind of core marketing strategy. This is really your awareness. How can you get new creators aware of your brand, your products, and really bring them into the fold and the way you engage with them on a day-to-day basis?
Definitely. So we talk about the kind of discrepancy between top 100 in total and top 100 in growth. Now we see something where they actually align. And this is one of the most interesting takeaways from the report for me. One of the ones that surprised me the most and kind of made me sit up and think, what's going on here? Because I think it's an unintuitive or counterintuitive result. Basically, what this is showing is earned media value per creator. This is an average for our top 100 in each category. And they're essentially the same. Each creator in the top 100 by total EMV is generating about 31,000, the same as the top 100 for year-over-year EMV growth. And so what this shows is that essentially you would think that, more established brands, bigger brands, Spotify and Nike's, the average creator is driving a lot more EMV. That's not necessarily true. Even though the top 100 brands by overall EMV generally were averaging, 10x the totals of the fastest growing brands when we're looking at raw EMV numbers on a per creator basis, it doesn't necessarily scale that way. As brands get larger and more prominent, if you have a healthy community from start to finish in the brand lifecycle, you're seeing roughly the same average contribution. And this is really useful for us because it gives brands a very clear benchmark in order to aim for.
I also love this because it shows where the growth in scale is coming from. And that's really going to be with micro creators, right? That's what's evening out this playing field, is that as brands grow, like brands like Nike, Amazon Prime, Red Bull, right? Like in that top list of kind of pure EMV brands, they are growing scaled communities with, yes, celebrity partners, athlete partners, powerhouse creators, but they have thousands of micro creators, again, creating this groundswell of conversation. And that's really what's balancing out those numbers. That's why that potency doesn't stay super high, because the scale of their community is really coming from micros, nanos, established people on their way up that are really engaging in kind of the zeitgeist around the brand. So that's where I think where it gets really interesting when you think of like kind of the groundswell of conversation you can create, is like there's power in that. This doesn't mean that these brands are interacting or activating every single one of these creators. They're just influencing broader conversation around the creator community in the way they run their programs, right? That's what they can control. And then that spreads across a network. Creators are connected to other creators. Creators want to talk about similar things, share connections. And so you're creating opportunities for conversation, content, et cetera, across that community organically via your programs.
Definitely. And I think that's a perfect seg into some of the trends that we saw when we're talking about what those conversations within those communities look like and what really stood out when we look at brand activity as a whole amongst these top brands within 2024.
Love it. Let's get into it.
All right. So here we have a brand that some of you might have heard of, Young LA. Now they're one of the hippest apparel brands out there in the game right now. And what really stood out to me about them was, again, we talk about sometimes discrepancy between metrics. They had a relatively small creator count overall. So just 2.3, so 2,300 creators talking about them in 2024. Despite that, their total engagement, so it's not on a per creator standpoint, that's this small band of creators and all of the engagement that they can drive, ranked 50 within the top 100 when we were looking at the total engagement category, which was way over indexing where the other brands were. When you would look at, who's driving the most engagement, they generally have a far larger community than what Young LA was able to achieve. So when you think of something that's over indexing in total engagement, a brand that you're seeing more likes, comments, shares, views, all of those traditional engagement metrics that we see for content, it's a testament to the passion of the fans within that brand community. And now most of these creators were, fashion bloggers or fashion influencers who were showing off various fits, showing off outfit of the day content. It was very organic and a real groundswell of enthusiasm for the brand as a whole. I think the other thing that Young LA did really well in order to garner that enthusiasm was to generate true hype around different drops and different launches that the brand engaged in. So that was a really effective strategy that other brands, can see fit to emulate relative to their respective categories and product lines.
I love too, when it comes to total engagements, one of the things you can think about is frequency. How often are your creators creating content about you? And depending on what category you sit in, say I'm a coffee brand, think about the frequency of coffee. That is like a daily activity, right? You can really create opportunity and routine around that. And so frequency is another lever here to drive total engagements, to really make sure you're in a position to kind of punch above your weight and create a consistent cadence of conversation.
Absolutely. And I think we see that, with Young LA, it does become a daily use brand for these core creators.
Completely.
Cool. Another area that really stood out to me and that's been standing out more and more in general is the field of sports and how that's leading the way when we look at creator retention. So again, we talked about retention earlier and the importance of it in order to gauge brand health and in order to gauge growth in general. So 7 of the 10 brands that we looked at that led in retention were sports teams. And I believe there is representation across all 4 major leagues within the United States. So NBA, NFL, MLB, and NHL. And one of the big reasons that we're seeing that kind of retention within the sports field specifically, I think it's twofold. One is that there's a locked-in community of sports media that is continually talking about these teams. So again, we do measure creators, we do measure that kind of organic groundswell, but when we look at that holistic universe of people talking about brands, we're also including all of the media that's wrapped up within that space as well. But the other trends that we see in terms of drawing eyes and locking in consistent posting activity around these teams, and the trend that I think is really exciting, is the rise of creators as athletes in and of themselves. So whether that's kind of taking you behind the scenes as a fan and showing you day in the life of an athlete, whether that's working as kind of a brand spokesperson, which is a more traditional thing within the field of athletes, but now we're kind of taking that and putting that into this new social media context. Or, think about how many players have a podcast now. And that's their kind of primary means of communicating and unpacking the game and being a member of the new media. Sorry to the guy in Philly, but that's what Paul George is more known for than his production for the 76ers. Hate to say it. So you're seeing a lot of that trend. You're also seeing at the same time these major sports leagues leveraging, leveraging creators in the traditional sense. So they're launching these programs that are actually bringing creators to the sidelines of games and empowering them and putting them front and center. So the NBA has its creator correspondent program, which debuted a few seasons ago, and that features kind of a range of creators who offer live coverage of different NBA events throughout the year. You can think of, if you're an NBA fan, at All-Star Weekend, suddenly Mr. Beast was everywhere, which some fans, maybe not as much of a fan of that development, but it is something that's done with an eye towards the Gen Z and Gen Alpha audience. In a similar way, the NFL has a Creator of the Week program where creators go to the sidelines and showcase new stadiums and team matchups each week. The MLB has a creator class program, which activated various creators from different verticals, gaming, lifestyle, and tech. And all of those creators who are not known for being sports creators were showing off their baseball fandom across a series of different initiatives. And ultimately that led right up to the World Series. So again, core programming for these sports leagues is now very much tied to creator marketing, and creators play a key role in helping those leagues find a new audience and lock in new fans.
I really love that aspect of this, because I think the fandom of sports is something that logically makes sense to me, but bringing in, kind of out of category or non-traditional creators in the way you can expand your community around that fandom, right? Sports fans are everyone and everything. And so bringing in, again, creators that come from outside of the industry, I think is really interesting and something that brands can learn a lot from. An example that I've given in the past from a different industry is beauty. ColourPop used to do this really well, where they would identify creators that specifically fell outside of their kind of traditional TAM, right? Like a ideal customer profile, and work with them to co-create new products so that they could increase their ability to reach new audiences, grow their communities, reach new consumers over time. And so again, it's like identifying that insight of like, people who buy my product are interested in so many different things. Let's figure out what exists in all those different kind of translation layers and lean in there in a way that can grow my brand over time. So I love that as a kind of different industry anecdote here, as we talk about sports fandoms and how you can use your community to kind of extend the way you've thought about your community in the past, which I guess is a good seg, because I think we're getting into beauty next.
We are indeed. It's almost like we planned this out or something. But it's really true that just before we get into the beauty part, that sports and other fields more broadly, there's more, and I know it's a buzzword, there's more synergy between different industries than I've ever seen before. And I think that's only increasing. So it is not at all atypical to see a creator who's known for one field posting about a brand in an entirely different field. It's not uncommon at all to see brands in these different industries working together on collaborations. And I think that's a trend that's only going to accelerate. But what's also accelerating still is beauty. So like Brit and I said at the top, we started out at Tribe Dynamics almost a decade ago. That was when the beauty industry was really taking off at its first kind of nascent stages with creator marketing. I remember that it was a big deal, big achievement, big news back then for a brand and an influencer to work together on a product. Now you have influencers who are launching brands in and of themselves, and that's old news. So to see beauty continuing to accelerate, even all these years later, is a pretty cool thing. And the way that they're doing it actually ties back to that point that we were making earlier about synergy. We do still see some of the old guard beauty brands show up, but when we're looking to the top 100 in growth, and we're looking to these new brands that are emerging into the space, what we see is a greater kind of alignment between traditional beauty, cosmetics, and skincare. Cosmetics brands might have pioneered creator marketing initially, but The data is showing that this vertical still manages to expand thanks to a heightened focus on skincare, which is something, again, to talk about the Gen Z and Gen Alpha market. That's really what's fueling a lot of this enthusiasm. And so with those lines between industries being murkier than before, that leaves a very clear lane for brands like TirTir, that's TIR, which is a Korean beauty brand, to really kind of excel in the space. And TirTir was impressive because when we look to growth, again, year over year improvement, it led in not only EMV and not only engagements, but impressions as well. So it kind of won that triple crown of the brand that stood out in growth for all of our key metrics there. So 1 decade into the creator economy, or a little more than a decade into the creator economy, the industry that's largely pioneered this space, beauty brands, is still seeing a lot of growth and still seeing a lot of potential. But those dynamics of who's talking about beauty and what those beauty brands are doing to stand out has changed pretty dramatically. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those platform dynamics that have changed. So when we get to those platform dynamics, setting it up there, the other brand that I want to mention is Spotify. And you might think, what does Spotify have to do with beauty? Just off the bat. So it has to do a lot, actually. Spotify was one of the biggest brands that we tracked in terms of overall earned media value. So 6.2 billion in 2024. And when we look to where that EMV is coming from, we see that Spotify's largest single platform contributor, with the majority of it, was actually YouTube. 3.9 billion coming from YouTube, which was a 39% year over year increase. So if we go to the next slide, we can see a little more detail around why YouTube is so big. So this comes courtesy of Edison Podcast Research. This is something I've written about in my newsletter, How to Build Brands and Influence People. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. But essentially, Edison Podcast Research did a little poll towards the end of last year about Gen Z media consumers and where do they watch and listen to podcasts? What's their primary kind of platform for that? They found that YouTube beat out Spotify and beat out Apple Podcasts in that category. That YouTube is becoming essentially like the new TV for this demographic. It is the go-to platform for podcast consumption. And that might not be a surprise to many people here. If you think about where you're getting your podcast clips from, whether that's a whole episode or you're just kind of watching highlights, you're just consuming this kind of media, YouTube is often the place for that. But when we think about historically, and this is tying back to beauty, what YouTube was used for in the creator economy, it wasn't always that way. And so now the field of content that we see on YouTube when it comes to creator marketing and the brands that stand to benefit from YouTube is dramatically different from what it used to be.
That's super interesting. I think another plug, we also publish our podcast on YouTube. I think too, one of the dynamics that we're seeing is that creator-led media channels are going to become more and more important over the next coming years. And what I mean when I say that is creators are going to start their own channels, their own communities. They're doing this already. Like, think of Substack, right? This is something that is very controllable to them, that they can build equity in as they evolve and mature their careers. And as we do that, you think about channels like owned podcasts, right, from creators. I interviewed a creator named Jacqueline Dallas, who's a consumer tech creator who has a massive following on YouTube, has interviewed every tech CEO that is kind of wielding influence today in the world. And again, these channels are owned, right? They're publishing on YouTube, but the podcast, kind of her media company, is owned by her. And so I think as we think about social media channels and how we can lean into creators and the way they're developing their own media companies, their own careers, and articulate those through the social media channels and platforms proper. I think that's a really interesting dynamic over the next couple of years. Again, really looking at, again, what are your creators doing? How are they building their business their businesses, how can you support that? Again, full circle back to retention. It's really working together to drive mutual growth and value over time. And this is one way, again, that creators are really trying to drive value for their businesses and brands.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the comment here in the chat as well about canceling various subscriptions and all of that kind of merging to YouTube. When we look at some of the other top 100 brands for YouTube, because that is a category that we look at, basically EMV on YouTube specifically. It's not just Spotify, it's Netflix, it's HBO Max, it's Prime Video, it's all of these streaming platforms. And so we are seeing a real convergence in terms of media channels and YouTube playing a key role within that.
Exactly. All right. So we talked about a lot of stuff today, tons of numbers, data, trends, insights, categories, industries, metrics. What can we take away from today?
Hopefully a lot, but just for simplicity, we got these 4 points for you. So essentially, first of all, doesn't matter if you're at the very top, if you're one of the top 100 by total EMV. We have love for the brands that are growing and trying to get to that point as well. And there's different takeaways depending on which bucket you are in and the life cycle and stage of your brand. Potency, engagement, and growth. Obviously, these are all important things. They are achievable no matter your stage in the life cycle. And the metrics that you should be aiming for are different depending on where you are in that stage. You should find the right social platform for your brand. So we talked about YouTube specifically, but the full report offers more highlights into which brands are winning on Instagram, which brands are winning on TikTok, the trends that we're seeing on these various platforms as well. And generally, there is a very pronounced industry breakdown in terms of which industry is succeeding on which platform. So that's something that I think will shed a lot of insights depending on the industry that you're in. And the various brands that you are measuring yourself against. Finally, I think learning from sports and the passion that they garner from their fans, that point that we talked about where you can be a lot of things in your day-to-day life. You can be active in a different space, in a different industry, but we all have our sports fandom. And that's an area that brings people from many different backgrounds together, united under one cause. And so we're seeing retention play out there and influencer marketing efforts play out there that I think are the start of something really big within that space. And finally, cross-industry synergy is huge. So like I was saying about bringing people together, don't stay in your lane. I think that's one thing that we're seeing from those top brands. So whether you're a beauty brand and you're expanding to have a skincare line, whether you're a food and beverage brand that's having partnerships with new media, whether you're a sports brand and you're saying, you know what, I want to work with gaming creators, I want to work with beauty creators, I want to tap into those markets. The audiences are all out there for these brands. And there's no one place in which you kind of need to corner that market to the expense of all other markets. I think that's something that comes through no matter the brand story that we're seeing throughout the top 100.
I love that. Okay, so we're running a little short on time. Have about 8 minutes left. We do have a couple questions, so I'm going to jump into those, and then we can kind of wrap things up. How do posts from creators using AI compare with posts that don't employ AI? And I'll leave that question as it was asked. And also, I'm going to throw in another one that I know gets brought up a lot, which is, what is the kind of utility of AI creators?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So I have two main responses to this. First, in our State of Creator Marketing report, which is an annual survey report that we do, and our most recent one was released in October 2024. That's available on our website. We talk about how many creators employ AI and also how many brands employ AI in their creator marketing efforts. And we do see that it's a very common thing, but the kind of scale of it varies. We've got the sirens going again for AI. I live in a decent neighborhood, by the way. I want people to be reassured of my safety. AI is effective, and we do find both creators and brands reporting positive effects, but mostly when it comes to the efficiency side of things. Not necessarily when it comes to, as Brit said, the AI influencers themselves. So these are influencers who are not flesh and blood, present as human beings, or maybe present as sort of android-esque creatures. We generally find a lower engagement rate for content coming from those creators. Ultimately, they have kind of a novelty factor. They have a certain level of curiosity to them, but people want to hear from flesh and blood creators primarily. Now, whether those creators are using AI kind of to make their operations more efficient, I think that's something that we're going to see a lot of. But creators ultimately link with their audiences best when there is a human touch. So when those posts come through and we see that human element, we do see a better performance for that kind of content.
Love that. Thanks, Alex. Just clarification on creator potency. Can you better define that as a metric? Is it value times posting? What is creator potency? What are we measuring there?
Right. So creator potency is essentially EMV per creator. So we have a separate metric, which I believe Brit mentioned before, which is frequency, and that's number of times posting. But that's basically with potency, that's just summing up the earned media value or engagement or impressions from all of the posts from an individual creator. And then when we do that for a creator count in aggregate, that gives you a potency level for the brand as a whole.
So it's how much like punch is each creator packing?
Right. And so you do want to see, generally a consistent level of content creation. You can have a large scale creator who posts once and their potency is the same as a smaller scale creator who posts 10, 20, et cetera times. So you do want to parse that number a little more, which is why we present it within that constellation of other metrics within brands of the year and within our other content as well.
Agreed. Okay, I love this next question because we get asked this quite a bit. Since all marketing channels ultimately reach a point of diminishing returns to scale, what signals should we pay attention to know if influencer marketing is becoming an exhausted channel?
It's a fascinating
question. How do we know that it's still growing? How do we know that there's still more road ahead of us?
Right. That's a great question. I think that there are several ways that we can assess that. Some are more quantitative and some are kind of more qualitative, holistic, feel of the industry, gut sense. One of the most basic ways that we can look at that, again, I'm going to cite our State of Creator Marketing report, which isn't Brands of the Year, but provides some good context for Brands of the Year. We ask creators and we ask brands and agencies directly, are you seeing greater ROI from influencer marketing than before? Are you devoting more resources towards it? Is this in your planning? Is this in your budget? And we see overwhelmingly the answer is yes, and growing more than ever before. We saw a greater outpouring of support for influencer marketing as a primary ROI driving marketing channel in our 2024 State of Creator Marketing report than we ever had before. So that's kind of the most basic answer to the question for me, is just kind of sentiment of the brand side that's actually employing influencer marketing. The other sense that I would say is, again, kind of that engagement level on posts themselves. So if we're starting to see digital consumers respond less to certain types of content within influencer marketing, that's a signal that, that content type might not be working. And we've kind of seen that for certain strategies that were employed formerly within the influencer marketing space in certain industries, but have fallen out of favor now. There's kind of a focus on underconsumption now, and brands can often get flamed for kind of going too big with some of their initiatives, especially if those initiatives aren't inclusive or environmentally sustainable. So I think that there's kind of a market sentiment within influencer marketing as a whole. And that if we were to consistently track creator posts, which we do, and we see a declining level of engagement, year after year, that's an indication that maybe the industry as a whole is starting to wear on consumers a little bit. So all of our metrics that kind of inform brand performance and are tied to that also can be tied back to the industry at large.
I love that. I think the again, the engagements, how are people responding is a huge piece of it. For me, it's also about, this is like a dynamic, living, breathing thing. It looks very different today than it used to look, and everyone can be a creator today. And so the way, like when we think about what an influencer is, what influencer marketing is, it's actually probably much broader than what you're envisioning. It is, again, it's conversation. It's how we are engaging and learning and connecting with people. And creators exist everywhere. The number of formats, the number of channels, the number of creators, we see that growing exponentially year on year. And so there are more conversations to be had, more communities to find yourself a part of. And so I think it's actually just the way it's changing, like the dynamic nature of influencer marketing. You really need to kind of understand that versus, is influencer marketing, waxing or waning?
Right. I think that's really true. We do have one late question here. Just, I know we're a little over time. So outside of providing product or services or straight payment, have you found any other forms of incentive to creators effective? What helps long-term creator engagement and culture? Excellent question. Something we've published a ton of reports about. I would say that in addition to obviously products and services and payments and all of that, it's really investment in a human relationship. I know that sounds corny, but time and again, when we talk to our brands, that's what we're pushing them to strive towards. And that's what really locks in creator enthusiasm over time. So that can include not just kind gestures, things of that nature, but tangible investment in a creator's professional development. That's another thing. This is a craft and a livelihood for creators. This is a full-time job and something that's really hard to do. And so when brands make that investment in terms of skill levels, saying, we don't just want you to be someone who mentions us X amount of times and touts this particular product. We want you to be better equipped to do your job when you're talking about other brands too. I think that level of care and attention is what separates winning brands in the influencer marketing space from those that don't get the most out of the practice.
We also know this was, and I love that we're ending this on a note that is around kind of a creator first approach, right? We know from our most recent survey that for the first time ever, creators are telling us that their number one motivation for working with a brand is growth opportunities. So that used to be, monetary reasons, right? Creators are building careers, they need to get paid. It was product quality, which I think is just a prerequisite today. But really it is around growth opportunities, around building long-term relationships with brands that you can grow together in. So we saw that from creators as well in our most recent survey. So I agree wholeheartedly with Alex's response there, investing in creators as business and brand partners and really helping them to build their own businesses and brands as they help you build yours is really, it shows this is a human-centered business that we're all in. Thank you all so much for spending your time, for engaging, for your questions. You can find us, so please connect with us. Alex and I are both on LinkedIn. You can email us. You'll get follow-ups from this webinar with all of the materials and the recording. So keep this conversation open. Let us know how we can be helpful and how we can help you kind of employ and understand these metrics as you look to what you can learn from the creator community, both your own and the creator universe at large.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much.